Hey folks, things are about to get real for stock market investing, primarily because of earnings, and things are crazy expensive. So I'm going to break down what you need to know, and then I'm going to share with you one single stock that I honestly think has 5x potential over the next couple years. But before I do, consider hitting that like button, folks, and let's kick it off by talking about how expensive these markets really are. I mean, we're taking a look at the S&P 500 all-time highs, up 18% year to date. That return from a general index is so ridiculous, considering everyone's 8% average return from the broader market. Not these days, folks. It's 20% or nothing. Look at the VTI, man, the global stock market index from Vanguard, up 17.4%, roughly just right in line. But you'll realize that's because both of these indexes roughly hold the same top weightings. But this is all driving the S&P 500 PE ratio to continued new all-time highs, sitting at about 46.48. Again, numbers we haven't seen since any major crash in the market for that matter. But the relevancy behind that is still skeptical. I bring that up a lot. But let's talk about these earnings. Look, pay attention, because Apple is the gem of the market. This is going to be the herring, the true definer of, are we finally on the other side of a pandemic and still in an absurd growth period? Or did people really oversupply on Apple computing products while they were at home in the midst of the pandemic? And we kind of headed into a moment where people were oversupplying, and now we're going to go into a moment of undersupplying. Who knows here, folks? But I would definitely watch this, because if things lackluster here, I wouldn't be surprised if we see lackluster performance across the tech board. So pay attention to those earnings coming out July 27th. Coming up quick here, folks, in about a week. Taking a look at Facebook. Now, this is one that I would still put on my buy list at this price. Unlike Apple, I still think we're heading into a massive transition of growth when it comes to how people market and advertise themselves, as I am constantly putting money into Facebook ads, and I'm using many more products of theirs than I ever used to. And again, you take a look at the news here, and the targets on this are insane. Facebook stock 410 target from Argus. Facebook stock should surpass 500 in the next year. This is just an incredible valuation. It continues to prove it. And now that the regulatory issues are out of the way of them being called a monopoly, all that stuff is finally out of the court. They can actually do more acquisitions. They can continue to scale the company without the court intervening constantly. So this is one that, of all the tech, I'm the most bullish on here, folks. I'm really excited for these earnings on July 28th. We do have Microsoft, the one that I'm most fascinated by. Why? Because currently it is one of the most expensive tech stocks, and it has been proving, thanks to Azure, Xbox, they're coming out with streaming games, all this other stuff has really driven this company into really, really high valuations at a 38 PE. I mean, it's trading well above Apple's valuation, which we're going to see on July 28th. So I'm also excited for this one, being one of the largest positions in my portfolio. A new recent ad that I'm still cost averaging into, of course, being Google here, which has been the best performer pretty much of the bunch here for the year, up 48%. Could you imagine a company at this scale growing 48% year to date, guys, just in the first half of this year? Can Google keep this up going into the second half? The time is truly going to tell here, and we're coming out with the earnings on July 27th. And then finally, of course, folks, we've got Amazon, which, like Apple, has kind of been slow growth, kind of a lackluster performance in the stock this year compared to these counterparts like Microsoft, like your Facebook and your Google here, right? But I still like Amazon. There's a bit of controversy surrounding whether they're going to be able to keep up the growth rate as well, which is another reason I'm sure many eyes are going to be glued on the earnings coming out on the 29th. We have like a few days where all these major companies that are going to decide whether we're still moving in a growth trajectory or whether things are starting to slow down, at which I honestly think if we see a big enough hindrance in the earnings growth, that I would not be surprised to see at a minimum a 5% haircut. And I am going to be glued to these earnings because I as well want to keep buying into these companies, but I recognize the absurd valuations that we currently sit on here. And if I'm going to be paying these premiums to buy these awesome, world-renowned, could hold probably for the rest of your life companies, you want to kind of make sure you're getting them at a price where you're not going to have to wait a few extra years to get that price appreciation back. So if we can prove in this earnings period that things are still on a growth trajectory, that'll probably prove to me that going into the holidays is going to be even stronger. And considering what we just saw from the banks, I think if that scenario plays out, I will definitely continue buying into them. But if we see the lackluster in performance here, which is why I'm waiting, I want to pick the dips up. So if I were you right now, I would not be playing this earnings cycle. Just see how it goes. If things bump up, hey, buy into them after they bump up, pay the premium. At least things are still on a good growth rate. Leading me into this one stock that I would be buying right now. I'm debating it personally. I do own it for helping some other people's accounts out, like my parents, however. But just taking a look, Alibaba. BABA, guys. I'm going to just mention a few things about this company because I'm sure you've heard some of the political rhetoric surrounding it, but it is trading down 30.41%, guys. This is a company that has more cash on hand than Apple. This is a company that does double the inventory shipments than Amazon does, and it's got earnings coming out August 19th. However, I don't care about these earnings. I think the company is honestly so insanely valued from where it currently sits, considering the growth they're expecting here in 2021. And the fact that the company is just trading at a PE ratio that the forward PE is like half as much as Apple's is right now, pretty much. And honestly, what you're probably going to hear is if you listen to the media, guys, surrounding this political rhetoric right now and what is going on in this market, you'll see some bullish articles, however, like, is Alibaba stock undervalued? Why the market gets it wrong? Markets can be irrational and fearful sometime, but eventually Baba's underlying value should materialize here. But I'm guessing if you're in the Western world, you're probably leaning to the other side of the news where you're hearing about things like Jack Ma, the CEOs, going missing. And then on top of that, guys, the ADR market, you know how they give you Chinese stocks. The ADR, just like depository receipts that just say, hey, you own a company in China here, and there's all these new rules and regulations around it. When the vast majority of U.S. companies that are U.S. based operate their corporate head offices through the U.S., a lot of them today are operating most of their parts, and a lot of them the machine dyeing tools are all coming out of China, yet we don't hear the same rhetoric about companies that aren't at the top of the publicly listed exchanges. So yes, this is some troubling news. Yes, there's always going to be this political rhetoric surrounding this conversation, and there's a lot of people that would say, heck, at the drop of a dime here, guys, China can come up with whatever rules they want, control these big companies. And yes, I believe that to be true, just as it is in the US. Obviously not in an apples to apples comparison here by any means. However, in a way that is comparable, I think there's one thing that matters most, and that is money. All these countries want more money, and both of these countries, you know, they make a lot of money off each other sharing the public market. And right now the U.S. is cracking down thanks to a lot of the Trump laws that he was trying to get passed on how these companies basically present their revenues, their data coming from China into the U.S. market, who sits on the board. Now they have to disclose that there's Communist Party and political leaders sitting on the boards. And a lot of this comes from political sidelining rhetoric, where when you hear it from Western media, it's always in a tone that's very dark. It's very cynical, whereas I don't think it's that cynical, as the Chinese Communist Party already came out and said that they don't want to do harm to these big companies because they're huge drivers to the economy. It's just a matter of where they are hindering the economy. Are they overstepping their bounds? Because obviously with something like Ant Group that was going to disrupt the entire financial system, which came as some concern, obviously the Communist Party, and obviously there's still a lot of concern around a lot of the CEOs that are stepping down from these big tech companies. Now, I might eat my own words here, folks, but I think things have gotten, again, in the Western media, the way people are perceiving Chinese stocks right now, it is through a very political lens. People are very overlooking the underlying valuation metrics, and at the end of the day, every country wants to make more money, and they're going to do everything they can to make sure that these companies keep driving in foreign dollars, that they keep growing, and they keep stimulating the economy, because it's the only way China can ever get to world power. There's just this interesting, weird dialect going on between these conglomerated companies and not the lower companies. I just find it so interesting how this news is projected, and to me, it screams a discount, because I guarantee you, for the coming quarters, we're going to continue to see BABA crush on earnings and revenue, and it's just going to keep climbing because they're cheaper. The valuation is cheaper than their underlying primary business of just doing e-commerce. Yet people aren't aware that they're getting into shipping food, self-driving vehicle. They're doing so much that you can't even comprehend. It's like trying to comprehend Amazon and everything they're doing, but at a scale that's double their size. It's just absolutely staggering to me. So I like I said, guys, I haven't bought it back yet, but when I look at it, guys, my mouth drools, and I'm like, hey, if you can just sit on this and just ride it out for the next year or two, eventually I do believe that value is going to materialize. And if it doesn't, I'm going to be eating my own words here. But it's too cheap, guys. It's too cheap. I want to know what you think in that comment section below, but stay cool, stay awesome, and I look forward to catching you tomorrow.